This is part 3, adjustments for students from diverse backgrounds. So as per video 2, the first example of student work there, the clapping exercise, and the students had to notate appropriately in the staves provided. So that currently has an approach to diverse learners through providing rhythmic examples performed in real time. So in a live setting, and the students were able to see that and hear that live in the classroom. You'll also notice the first example is already done for them there. So 2 through to 10 was the students' work, and that first example was already done. And what that meant was, on the day we actually engaged in this exercise, I was able to play that rhythm live for the students. They were able to see how it was notated there on the page, and that basically just served as a guide for completing the rest of the task. As an introduction to this exercise, you'll also notice the rhythms we've used are very basic and use simple note symbols. These are all displayed in the top right hand corner, just in the key there, and that's obviously a minim, crotchet, quaver, and a crotchet rest, and these are the only notes used throughout the exercise. Potential improvements for this. Obviously, the rhythms are played on the day at 60 BPM. Now, if that was potentially too fast for some of the students, you could slow that to 50 BPM, say, or 45. Another thing you could do is reduce or increase the number of rhythms. So obviously there's 2 bars per example here. You could shorten that to 1 bar, or potentially for greater complexity add on another few. So it could be 3 bars or 4 bars, say. Another thing you could do is simplify the notes used, or to add greater complexity, more complex notes. Obviously, to simplify rhythms using only crotchets and quavers and quaver rests, say. Or for greater complexity, adding semiquavers or minim rests. Another thing you could do to differentiate here in this exercise is to change the time signature, so potentially 2/4 or 3/4. This exercise meets literacy requirements by asking the students to analyse the rhythms audibly, so when they hear them live in the classroom, analysing those sounds and how they relate to the music on the page. And then obviously writing those rhythms as they hear them in correct musical notation. The numeracy requirements for this exercise were basically just developing students' ability to recognise beat, pulse, rhythm, meter, and subdivision in music when it was performed live, and then obviously recognising it when it's notated on the page. So the second example of student work there is obviously on form and structure, and it caters to diverse learners through delivering information through both audio and visual imagery. So basically on the day, it was a particular 5-minute educational video which the students took notes from, and it delivered information through both audio and visual imagery, audio in the form of the voice of the presenter, and musical samples used throughout the video, and then visual imagery as well, so picture examples of phrases and sections in written music as part of the presentation. This particular method of information delivery was very effective because we could pause it whenever we needed to. So a particular point of information would come up, we'd pause the video, students could take in-depth notes on that information, and then we could discuss it as a class following that. Potential improvements for this particular exercise. In general, students were unable to define form and structure. What does this mean? Well, basically we could change the video presentation to something a little more suitable. Find an information video with simpler explanations, and more relatable information, so that the students could obviously then define those 2 key terms. We could also, in addition, adjust questions. You'll notice in the previous video, some of my feedback to different students was, that's a great idea, but we can build upon that. How do we build on these core ideas? And so for that reason, specific questions, for the purpose of more detailed responses from students in these examples. For higher achievers potentially in this exercise, introducing additional forms. So we currently have binary and ternary. You could also introduce rondo form as well for higher achievers. The literacy requirements for this exercise were all in the terminology. So the video presentation looked at defining musical terms, key terms, and those were phrase, section, binary, ternary, form, and structure. And so defining those key musical terms throughout the presentation and then in the notes here. Also analysis of musical examples in the presentation. So samples given, students having to analyse them quickly, and then obviously relate them to the musical terms that were in these questions in the example, and connecting that to that terminology. And then numeracy requirements in the same exercise, basically just developing students' ability to recognise beat, pulse, rhythm, meter, subdivision in sections and phrases of music that featured in the presentation. Calculation and measurement of music into sections as well that they heard, and then recognition of patterns and sequences as they relate to form and structure. So the final piece of student work was basically just on identifying different musical forms from a list of examples given on the worksheet there. So 7 examples identifying binary or ternary form from the examples on that worksheet. This catered to diverse learners in a number of ways. The first was just basically a quick quiz format approach. 2 possible answers for each question, so very simple. And these questions were on basic musical forms only, so just binary and ternary, as a simple introduction to the concept, so ease into it slowly. Very simple examples, easily read and easily understood. Students can see it and absorb it quickly. Potential improvements for this particular exercise: we could certainly revise binary and ternary form in the lesson prior to doing this worksheet. How to recognize both forms. What does binary look like? What does ternary look like? What are the differences? And then complete this worksheet following that. As a differentiated approach, instead of having examples on the left, say, written forms, have live musical samples. Play a short piece of music, and ask the students to tell for themselves: is this binary form or is this piece in ternary form? You could also have a live musical demonstration. So there's few different ways to sort of go about this particular exercise. You could simplify the examples in the questions by removing, say question 5, or adding additional questions for added complexity. For higher achievers, also additional examples of musical forms. So not just binary and ternary, potentially add rondo form as well to this particular exercise. Now, this activity obviously meets literacy requirements in analysing written musical forms, as well as terminology, so the meaning of form, the meaning of binary, the meaning of ternary, and how these things relate to music. Numeracy requirements met in the task. Obviously just the recognition of patterns and sequences as they relate to musical forms. This has been the end of this 3-part video series. Thank you very much for watching.